The morning air was cool and filled with the soft hum of traffic. People were rushing around the city square trying to catch buses or grab a quick coffee before work. In the middle of all that noise stood something unusual, an old upright piano placed beside the bus stop. Its paint was chipped and a small sign on top read, "Play Me." Most people passed by without a second glance. It had been there for months, part of some city art program, but hardly anyone bothered to play it anymore. Among the crowd that morning was a young woman carrying a simple canvas backpack. Her clothes were plain, her hair tied back in a loose bun. She looked tired but calm, like someone who had seen too much in too little time. She waited quietly, standing beside the piano while others scrolled through their phones. Every now and then she glanced at the instrument, her eyes soft with some kind of memory. A man in a gray suit stood nearby, impatiently checking his watch. He looked like one of those people always in a hurry, always irritated by anything that didn't fit into his schedule. He noticed the young woman staring at the piano and gave a small amused snort. "Don't tell me you're going to play that thing," he said with a smirk, loud enough for others to hear. A few people looked up, curious. The woman didn't respond right away. She just smiled politely, then sat down on the worn piano bench. The man rolled his eyes. "Oh, this should be good," he muttered, crossing his arms. He wasn't trying to be cruel, just careless. He saw a quiet girl and assumed she couldn't possibly do anything impressive. The world had made him that way, too busy to notice kindness, too proud to expect beauty from ordinary places. The woman placed her hands gently on the keys. They were slightly out of tune, a few sticking when pressed, but she didn't seem to mind. Her fingers lingered there for a moment as if greeting an old friend. Around her, the sounds of the city continued, the hiss of bus brakes, the chatter of people, the honk of distant cars. Yet in that small pocket of space, it suddenly felt quieter. She took a deep breath and pressed the first key. It made a soft, hesitant note that wavered in the air before fading. The man smirked again, shaking his head. But then she pressed another key and another, and soon the melody began to form. Slow at first, unsure, like a whisper testing its voice. There was something different about the way she played. The notes didn't sound perfect, but they carried emotion. Her fingers moved with care, each touch deliberate, each pause filled with meaning. It was as if she was telling a story without words. And even though the piano wasn't in great shape, it responded to her like it remembered her touch. A few people who had been scrolling through their phones looked up. One woman with a cup of coffee paused mid-sip. A boy holding his backpack stopped tapping his foot. The music was gentle, but it reached people in a way they didn't expect. The melody began to grow stronger, more confident. Her hands moved faster now, finding a rhythm that seemed to flow from her heart straight into the keys. The man in the gray suit frowned, caught off guard. He hadn't expected this. The woman he had mocked now played with such grace that he couldn't look away. The sound filled the air around the bus stop, turning that ordinary morning into something special. The buses came and went, but no one moved. Everyone seemed frozen in that moment, their worries forgotten. She closed her eyes as she played, her head tilting slightly with each change in tone. There was something about her expression, peaceful but full of feeling, that made it clear this wasn't just random playing. This was emotion turned into music. The melody rose and fell, sometimes soft like a lullaby, sometimes strong like a storm. Even the city seemed to quiet down as if listening. The man's smirk was gone now. He stood still, his face slowly changing from amusement to awe. For a second, he even forgot he was late. Around him, people began whispering in amazement. Someone pulled out a phone to record. The woman's fingers danced across the keys like they had done this 1,000 times before. Every movement effortless, every sound rich with meaning. A child sitting beside her mother leaned forward, eyes wide. "She's really good," the little one whispered. The mother nodded, unable to look away. Even an older man sitting on the bench nearby wiped a tear from his eye, as if the music had touched something deep inside him. The tune shifted again, lighter now, full of hope. The woman's face softened as the rhythm turned playful, her hands moving faster with an ease that came from years of practice. It wasn't just talent, it was soul. Every note carried a feeling of pain, of healing, of something lost and found again. People around the bus stop started recording, not because they were bored, but because they knew they were witnessing something rare, something beautiful. As the last few notes echoed, the woman finally opened her eyes. For a heartbeat, everything was still. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then, as if waking from a dream, people started clapping, softly at first, then louder. The sound of applause filled the air, mixing with the distant noise of the city. Even the man who had scoffed at her earlier joined in, though his claps came slower, more hesitant. His face showed something between regret and admiration. The woman smiled shyly, stood up from the piano bench, and gave a small nod to the crowd. She didn't say anything. She just slung her backpack over her shoulder and started walking away, her steps calm and unhurried. People turned to watch her leave, still clapping, still smiling. The man in the gray suit stood frozen for a moment before calling out, "Hey, wait!" But she didn't turn around. She simply disappeared into the moving crowd. He stood there, feeling something he couldn't quite explain. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was admiration. Maybe it was both. The buses kept coming, the city kept moving, but for him the moment stayed. He had mocked someone without knowing who she was, without realizing she carried something extraordinary inside her. Now, that single tune kept replaying in his mind. The rest of the people slowly went back to their routines, but the atmosphere had changed. Conversation started. "Who was she?" someone asked. "Did you see how she played?" another said. A few shared their videos online, tagging the location and writing captions like, "This just happened at the bus stop. Pure magic." The piano sat there quietly again, its keys still trembling from the echoes of her song. The air around it felt different now, as if it had remembered something too. For a long time, no one dared to touch it. They just looked at it as they passed with a kind of silent respect. That day, a simple morning at a bus stop became a memory for everyone who was there. No one knew who the woman was or where she went, but her music stayed in their hearts. The man in the gray suit found himself returning to that same bus stop the next morning, hoping she might appear again. He even tried pressing a few keys on the piano, but the sound felt empty. It wasn't the same. For the first time in a long while, he noticed the little things around him. The sound of birds, the smell of fresh bread from the bakery across the street, the laughter of a child nearby. Maybe that was her gift. Not just the music, but the way it opened people's eyes to beauty they had forgotten to see. And so, while the city carried on, those who heard her play that morning carried a secret sense of wonder. A reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary moments come from the most unexpected places, and sometimes the person we underestimate turns out to have the brightest light of all. The next morning, the same bus stop looked just as ordinary as before. People were rushing by, lost in their routines, their faces buried in phones or hidden behind cups of coffee. The piano still sat quietly at the corner, looking a little lonelier than yesterday. But those who had been there the day before couldn't stop thinking about the music that had filled the air. Something about it had changed how they saw this place. It wasn't just a stop anymore. It had become a small corner of wonder. The man in the gray suit returned. He didn't know why exactly. Maybe it was guilt or maybe it was curiosity. He stood a few feet away from the piano, pretending to check his phone but glancing at it now and then. It looked just like before, scratched keys, chipped paint, a few broken notes. Yet somehow it felt alive, like it was waiting for her to come back. He had thought about her all night. The sound of her playing had stayed in his mind, soft and haunting. It had made him question the way he looked at people. He remembered how easily he had mocked her, how quickly he had assumed she wasn't worth paying attention to. Now he wished he could take those words back. But she was gone, and he didn't even know her name. As he stood there lost in thought, an older man walked up and sat on the piano bench. He looked around nervously before pressing a few random keys. The sound was rough and out of tune. The man laughed at himself and said, "Guess I'm no musician." People nearby smiled politely. For a brief second, everyone remembered the day before and wondered if the mysterious woman would ever come back. By midday, the crowd had thinned. Buses came and went. The piano sat untouched again. Then, from across the street, someone noticed a familiar figure walking toward it. It was her, the same woman with the backpack, her calm expression unchanged. People began to whisper, pointing quietly. Even the man in the gray suit straightened up, his heart beating a little faster. She reached the piano and gently ran her fingers over the keys, as if checking if it was still there. The small group that recognized her stayed silent, waiting. Without a word, she sat down. This time she didn't hesitate. Her hands moved confidently and the first notes rose like a whisper of memory. The melody was different now. Yesterday it had been emotional, almost fragile. Today it was stronger, clear, bright, and full of energy. It sounded like a sunrise, like hope stretching after a long night. People stopped walking again. Some even crossed the street to get closer. Within minutes, a small crowd had gathered around her. The man in the gray suit watched closely, this time without judgment. He noticed small details he hadn't seen before. The way her fingers curved perfectly over the keys, the slight smile that appeared when she hit a beautiful note, the quiet focus in her eyes. He realized she wasn't just playing music. She was living it. Every sound she made came from somewhere deep inside. As she played, a gentle breeze moved through the square, carrying her music farther than before. People sitting at the cafe nearby put down their cups. A bus driver leaned out of his window to listen. Even a stray dog lay down near the piano, its ears twitching at the rhythm. It was as if the whole city paused for her. She shifted the melody again, turning it softer. Her fingers slowed, and the notes seemed to tell a story, one of longing and loss, of finding light after darkness. Her eyes glistened as she played, but she didn't stop. The crowd grew quiet. Some felt a lump in their throat, though they couldn't explain why. The music reached a part of them that words never could. When she finally stopped, there was a moment of silence. Then, just like the day before, the applause began, loud, genuine, heartfelt. People smiled, clapped, and cheered. Someone shouted, "That was amazing." She gave a small nod, her expression still calm but her eyes warm with gratitude. The man in the gray suit finally stepped forward. He felt his heart pounding as he approached her. "Excuse me," he said softly. She looked up, surprised but not unfriendly. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For what I said yesterday, I shouldn't have mocked you. I didn't know." She looked at him for a moment, then gave a gentle smile. "It's okay," she said simply. "Sometimes people don't listen until they hear." Her words hit him harder than he expected. They were kind, but they carried truth. He nodded slowly, unsure what else to say. "You play beautifully," he finally added. It's like your music changes everything around it." She laughed softly, not proud, just humble. "Music can do that," she said. "It helps people remember who they are." Then she stood, adjusted her backpack, and looked around at the crowd that was still watching her. "Thank you for listening." As she started to leave again, an older woman stepped forward from the group. "Wait," she said, her voice trembling. "I've seen you before. You're that pianist who used to perform at the city concert hall, aren't you?" The crowd began murmuring again. The young woman paused, her smile fading for a second. "I used to play there," she admitted softly. "But not anymore." "Why not?" someone asked from the crowd. She hesitated, her hands tightening around the strap of her bag. "Life happens," she said finally. "Sometimes you lose things you love and you have to find new ways to love them again." The words hung in the air, heavy and honest. No one asked anything else. They just looked at her with a quiet kind of respect. The man in the gray suit watched her walk away again, this time feeling a strange mix of sadness and admiration. He wanted to stop her, to ask her more, but he knew she wasn't looking for attention. She played because she needed to, not for applause. After she disappeared into the crowd once more, people lingered at the bus stop, talking softly among themselves. The piano had become something sacred now, a reminder that beauty could bloom in the most unexpected places. Some stayed for a while, hoping she might come back again. The man in the gray suit sat on the bench, staring at the piano for a long time. He thought about her words. Sometimes people don't listen until they hear. He realized he had spent most of his life hearing, but never really listening. To people, to moments, to life. Everything had become a rush, but now something had shifted inside him. That evening he went home and found an old guitar in his closet covered in dust. He had stopped playing years ago, too busy with work and deadlines. For the first time in forever, he picked it up and strummed a few chords. It didn't sound perfect, but it felt good. It felt real. He smiled to himself, thinking of the woman at the bus stop. The next few days he kept returning to the same spot. Sometimes she came, sometimes she didn't, but every time she did, more people gathered. The small performances became like quiet miracles in the middle of city chaos. Strangers who would never talk to each other began sharing smiles and short conversations while she played. One day, a group of students brought flowers and placed them on the piano as a thank you. Another day, someone left a note that read, "Your music makes bad days better." She never stayed long enough to see who left the gifts, but her expression always softened when she noticed them. The man in the gray suit started greeting people he saw there regularly. He learned their names, their stories. The bus stop slowly became a small community, bound together by the sound of one woman's piano. And though no one knew her full story, everyone agreed on one thing. Her music had changed something in all of them. She kept coming for weeks, always at random times, always playing with her heart wide open. And every time she did, the city felt a little warmer, the people a little kinder, the mornings a little more beautiful. What began as one moment of mockery turned into a quiet movement of connection and hope, and none of them, especially the man in the gray suit, would ever look at that bus stop the same way again. Days turned into weeks, and the story of the woman at the bus stop piano began to spread quietly through the city. People talked about her in coffee shops, offices, and even on social media. Some called her the bus stop pianist. Others referred to her as the mystery musician. Her music became a small spark of light in a world that often felt dull and rushed. Every time someone saw her sitting at that piano, it felt like the start of something beautiful. The man in the gray suit, who used to rush through his mornings without looking at anyone, had changed the most. He now arrived early just to see if she would show up. Sometimes she did, sometimes she didn't. But even when she didn't come, he stayed for a while, watching the people who gathered, listening to the soft hum of life around the piano. It had become more than just an instrument. It was a place where strangers connected. One chilly morning, the air smelled of rain and the sky was a soft shade of gray. The man stood near the bus stop with his hands in his pockets, watching the empty piano. The city seemed quieter than usual. Then, like a moment out of a dream, she appeared again. Her backpack hung from one shoulder, and her fingers were tucked into the sleeves of her sweater to keep warm. As always, she didn't draw attention to herself. She just walked up to the piano, brushed off the light dust from the keys, and sat down. The man smiled softly. Around him, people began to notice her too. Within minutes, a small group had gathered, waiting in silence. She looked around once, as if taking in the familiar faces, and then began to play. The first few notes were soft and low, like a whisper on a cold morning. The music felt different this time, deeper, slower, more emotional. It was a song that seemed to carry memories like pages turning in an old book. Each note held a weight, a story. The crowd listened quietly, their breaths forming small clouds in the chilly air. Halfway through the piece, the man noticed her eyes fill with tears. She didn't stop playing. Her fingers moved steadily, gracefully, but her expression said everything. She wasn't performing for applause or attention. She was speaking through the piano, sharing something she couldn't say out loud. The man felt something tighten in his chest. He wished he could do something, say something, but he didn't want to interrupt her moment. Around him, others seemed to feel the same. Some had their hands clasped together. Others just stood still, lost in the music. It wasn't just beautiful. It was heartbreaking in the most peaceful way. When the song finally ended, the silence that followed was heavy and full. The woman didn't look up right away. She stayed still, her hands resting on the keys, her head bowed slightly. Then slowly she stood and wiped her face with her sleeve. People started clapping, softly at first, then louder, trying to express what words couldn't. She gave a small nod and turned to leave. Before she could walk away, the man stepped forward. "That was incredible," he said quietly. "Thank you for sharing that." She gave him a faint smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's just music," she replied. But he shook his head. "No, it's more than that. It's like you're telling stories without speaking." For a moment, she just looked at him as if debating whether to say something. Then she sighed softly and sat back down on the piano bench. "Maybe it's because the stories are real," she said. "Every song I play means something I've lived." He stayed quiet, sensing she was about to open up. The crowd stayed nearby but kept a respectful distance. "I used to play on big stages," she continued, her voice gentle. "Orchestras, theaters, even festivals. People clapped and cheered, but I never really heard them. It was all too fast. Then, life slowed me down." She paused, her eyes drifting somewhere far away. "Someone I loved used to sit in the front row for every concert. He said he could tell how I felt just by the way I played. When he was gone, I couldn't play anymore. The piano just went silent. The man listened, not saying a word. The people around the bus stop stayed quiet too, as if they knew they were hearing something sacred. I walked away from everything," she said softly. "The fame, the concerts, the stage lights. I thought if I stopped playing, the pain would stop too. But music doesn't really leave you, it waits. And one day I saw this piano here, sitting all alone at the bus stop. I touched it just for a second and it felt like it remembered me. She smiled faintly, so I started again. Not for anyone else, just for me. The man felt a lump in his throat. Around him, a few people wiped their eyes. The woman stood again, adjusting her backpack. "That's why I come here," she said. "This piano doesn't care who I was. It just lets me be who I am." The man nodded, his voice low. "And we're lucky for that," he said. "Because when you play, you remind us of something we forget every day, that beauty still exists even in small places." She looked at him, and this time her smile was genuine. "Thank you," she said simply. Then she turned and began walking away again. But this time she didn't disappear so quickly. She moved slower, as if she was in no rush, and the people around her smiled as she passed. After she left, the man stayed behind. He sat on the piano bench, resting his hands where hers had been. The wood was still warm. He didn't know how to play much, but he pressed a few keys anyway. The sound was uneven, rough, but he didn't care. It made him feel connected, to her, to the crowd, to something bigger than himself. In the days that followed, more people began visiting the bus stop, hoping to see her. Some came early before work, others during lunch breaks. The piano became a symbol of hope, healing, and second chances. A few local musicians even started leaving sheet music for anyone who wanted to play. Children took turns pressing the keys, laughing when they made funny sounds. The once boring bus stop had turned into a place full of warmth. The man noticed how it all changed. People were talking to each other more, smiling more. It wasn't just about her music anymore. It was about what it brought out in everyone else. Strangers began to connect through shared silence, shared emotion. The city that once felt too big and cold suddenly felt smaller, kinder. One evening, when the sun was setting and the sky glowed orange, the man returned again. The bus stop was quiet, the piano untouched. He sat on the bench and watched as the light hit the keys. Then from across the street, he saw her again. She walked up slowly, her face calm but thoughtful. She looked at the piano for a moment, then at him. "You're still here," she said. He smiled. "I guess I've become part of the furniture." She laughed softly. "You remind me of the piano," she said. "You both waited," he shrugged. "Maybe waiting isn't so bad when it's for something worth it." She sat down and began to play again. This time the melody was brighter, full of life. It was like a conversation between her and the world, a promise that she had found her way back. The man watched her, feeling proud in a way he couldn't explain. Around them, the small crowd that had gathered listened quietly, their faces lit by the golden light of the setting sun. When she finished, everyone clapped again. She smiled, thanked them, and turned to the man. "You know," she said softly, "music sounds different when someone's really listening." He nodded. "Then I'll keep listening." And she smiled once more before walking away, her steps light, her heart lighter than it had been in a long time. That evening, as darkness settled and the last bus pulled away, the man stayed for a moment longer. The city lights reflected on the piano's surface. It wasn't just an instrument anymore. It was a reminder of change, of kindness, of how one person's courage to share their heart could inspire a whole city to feel again. And from that day on, every time someone sat down to play, they weren't just playing music. They were continuing her story, a story born from loss, healed by sound, and shared by everyone who stopped to listen. The days grew colder as winter approached, but the bus stop remained alive with the spirit of music. The piano had become a symbol of something pure and kind in the middle of the noisy city. People who once walked past without noticing now slowed down, hoping to hear even a single note. The woman had no set schedule, yet everyone seemed to sense when she would come. It was as if the city itself knew when she was near. One frosty morning, the man in the gray suit arrived early. His breath came out in small clouds as he rubbed his hands together for warmth. The piano looked lonely under the soft drizzle of rain, its keys spotted with drops of water. Someone had covered it with a piece of cloth to protect it. He smiled at the thought that strangers now cared enough to look after it. He waited for almost an hour before she appeared, her steps steady and calm. She wore a long coat and a scarf wrapped loosely around her neck. Her backpack was the same, slightly worn but full of character. She smiled faintly when she saw him. "You're early," she said. He laughed softly. "I guess I didn't want to miss the concert." She chuckled and brushed the rain off the piano before sitting down. The small crowd that had gathered watched quietly as she lifted the cover and placed her hands on the keys. The first sound that came out was soft and clear, like a drop of water hitting a calm pond. Then another and another until a melody began to form. Her music that day was warm and comforting, like a fire on a cold evening. It spoke of peace, of gentle moments that people often forget to notice. Some people in the crowd closed their eyes, letting the music wrap around them like a blanket. The man in the gray suit leaned against the bus stop pole, completely lost in the sound. As she played, something beautiful happened. Across the street, a florist stepped out of her shop holding a small bunch of flowers. She crossed the road carefully and placed the flowers beside the piano. The woman playing looked up and gave her a grateful smile, never missing a note. Soon others followed. Someone placed a small drawing. Another left a note that said, "Your music makes this city feel human again." When the song ended, the applause came not just from the people nearby, but from those passing by in buses, from shop windows, and even from workers standing across the street. The woman blushed slightly, nodding her head in thanks. The man stepped forward and handed her a warm coffee he had bought earlier. "You'll freeze if you keep playing in this weather," he said gently. She smiled and took it. "Music keeps me warm," she said softly. Then she looked around at the crowd, her expression thoughtful. "Do you ever wonder why people stop to listen?" she asked him. "Maybe because it feels real," he replied. "There's too much noise in the world, but not enough truth." Her eyes softened at his words. "Maybe that's why I keep coming back," she said. "To remind myself that truth still sounds beautiful." They stood there for a moment in comfortable silence. Around them, the city moved on. Buses came and went, people hurried past, but the piano remained the center of calm in all the motion. Then, without saying much more, she sat back down and began to play again. This time it was a lively tune, full of joy. The sound bounced through the air, bright and playful. Children danced near the sidewalk, laughing as they tried to mimic the rhythm. Even the man couldn't help but smile widely. As the melody reached its peak, a young boy approached the piano, his eyes full of wonder. He couldn't have been more than 8 years old. He looked up at her shyly. "Can I try?" he asked. The woman paused, her smile widening. "Of course," she said, moving aside to give him space. The boy pressed one key, then another, giggling as the sounds came out. His small fingers fumbled, but his excitement made everyone laugh softly. She leaned down and showed him how to play a simple tune, pressing his little fingers gently into place. "See," she said, "you don't have to play perfectly. You just have to play with your heart." The boy nodded seriously, repeating the notes until they formed a shaky but sweet melody. When he finished, the crowd clapped for him. His eyes lit up and he turned to his mother, who was smiling proudly. The woman patted his shoulder. "Remember," she said kindly, "music is just another way to speak." The boy nodded again before running back to his mother. The man watched the whole moment unfold, feeling a strange sense of warmth inside him. He realized it wasn't just her music that changed people, it was her kindness. She had a way of seeing the good in everyone, of making even small interactions meaningful. Later that day, as the crowd thinned and she began packing her things, he walked up to her. "You know," he said, "you've turned this bus stop into something special. It used to be just a place people passed through. Now it feels like a place people come to remember something important." She looked at him thoughtfully. "Maybe we all need reminders," she said. "The world moves fast, but music makes it slow down for a moment. It helps people see what's been there all along." He nodded, understanding more than words could express. Then he asked quietly, "Do you ever think about going back? To the big stages, the lights, the crowds?" She paused, her gaze distant. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But I think I found something purer here. When I play here, it's not about fame or perfection. It's just about connection." He smiled. "Then I hope you never stop." She looked down at the piano and brushed her fingers across the keys one last time. "Neither do I," she whispered. The next few weeks brought even more people to the bus stop. Some came to listen, others to play. A small group of students even painted a mural on the wall behind the piano, a colorful scene of music notes floating through the air. At the center of it, they painted the outline of a woman playing, her face calm and peaceful. No one signed it, but everyone knew who it was for. The piano became more than a public art piece. It became part of the city's heartbeat. Even when she wasn't there, people played it. Sometimes it was a child trying out a simple tune. Sometimes it was a tired office worker letting out the stress of the day. Every sound felt alive, connected to her in some way. The man noticed that she began staying longer each time she came. She talked more, smiled more. The sadness that once lingered in her eyes had softened. It was as if playing at the bus stop had slowly healed her. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky orange and pink, she turned to him and said, "You know, I used to think I'd lost everything when I stopped playing. But maybe I just needed to find a new stage." He nodded, smiling gently. "And you found it right here." She looked around at the people laughing and talking, the children chasing each other, the soft hum of life around the piano. "Yes," she said, "I did." As night fell, she played one last song before leaving. It was soft and full of gratitude, like a quiet goodbye wrapped in hope. The man watched her with admiration. When she finished, she looked at him and said, "Thank you for waiting all this time." He smiled warmly. "Thank you for showing up." She nodded, then walked away slowly, her steps echoing in the cool night air. The man stayed for a while, watching the empty piano. The mural behind it glowed under the streetlight, and for a moment, he thought about how much one person's kindness could change a place, a day, even a heart. He didn't know if she would come back again or when. But he knew that even if she didn't, her music had already become a part of the city, a part of everyone who had ever stopped to listen. Winter finally arrived with its full chill, and the mornings grew quieter. The city streets were still busy, but the air carried a softness that only cold weather brings. The bus stop piano stood there, worn yet loved, its keys slightly faded from all the hands that had played it. Snow had begun to gather on its edges, and someone had placed a small string of lights around it. They flickered gently, making the piano look almost magical against the gray sky. The man in the gray suit arrived as usual. His hands were buried deep in his coat pockets, and his breath came out in short, cloudy puffs. He looked at the piano and smiled faintly, though there was something heavy in his eyes. It had been weeks since he'd last seen her. People still came to play, still gathered to listen, but she hadn't returned. Each day he told himself she would show up, but the days kept passing. He wasn't the only one who missed her. The city had grown used to her presence. The soft hum of her music, the way she smiled at strangers, the warmth she brought to even the coldest mornings. Without her, something felt incomplete. People still left flowers and notes by the piano, as if hoping she might come back to see them. One afternoon, as the snow began to fall heavier, the man noticed something on the piano bench. It was a small envelope tucked under the cover. His heart raced as he reached for it. Inside there was a simple note written in neat handwriting. "Thank you for listening when no one else did. The world is wide and there are more places that need music. But a part of me will always be here at this bus stop with all of you." He read it twice, his eyes stinging from more than just the cold. He folded the note carefully and placed it back where he found it. The wind blew softly, brushing against the paper as if carrying her words through the city once more. The days that followed were quiet, but not sad. People continued to visit the piano. Some played songs they remembered her performing. Others tried new tunes of their own. The bus stop had become something special, a place that reminded people that kindness and beauty could grow anywhere, even in the middle of rush hour. One morning, a woman wearing a bright red scarf stopped at the piano. She was older, with gentle eyes and hands that looked practiced. She ran her fingers over the keys, smiled, and began to play. The melody was soft and familiar, the same tune that the woman used to play on her first day there. The man in the gray suit stood nearby, his heart tightening. The new woman played beautifully, but it wasn't the same. Still, he was grateful. The music was alive again. As the weeks turned into months, the piano became part of the city's rhythm. It was there through snow and sun, through quiet mornings and busy evenings. Sometimes school children gathered around it laughing as they made up songs. Other times, tired workers stopped just to listen for a few minutes before catching their bus. It became more than an instrument. It became a reminder that moments of beauty don't need a stage. Then, one early spring morning, something unexpected happened. The man arrived at the bus stop as usual, coffee in hand. The air was still cool, but the snow had melted, leaving the streets damp and shiny. As he approached, he froze. Sitting at the piano was a familiar figure. the long hair tucked under a knitted hat, the same worn backpack beside her. She was back. For a moment, he couldn't move. She looked different, more peaceful, more grounded, but her presence felt the same. When she noticed him, she smiled, her eyes lighting up in that familiar way. "You still come here?" she asked softly. He laughed, his voice catching slightly. "I could ask you the same thing." She chuckled and motioned for him to sit beside her. "I didn't plan to come back," she said. "But I missed this place. I missed the people. I missed the feeling." Her fingers brushed the keys lightly. "Everywhere I went, I played for crowds. They clapped, they cheered, but it never felt like this." He nodded. "Because this isn't about applause," she smiled. "Exactly. It's about connection." She began to play again, and just like before, people started to gather. The first few notes drifted through the air, soft and full of warmth. The melody carried a story of leaving and returning, of change and remembrance. It wasn't sad. It was full of life. People smiled as they recognized her. Some waved. Others simply stood still, taking in the moment. When the song ended, the crowd clapped, but not in a loud or showy way. It was gentle, full of respect. The woman looked around and said quietly, "Thank you for keeping this alive." An older man in the crowd spoke up. "You gave this place meaning. We just didn't want it to fade." She smiled again, her eyes soft. "Then we did it together." After that day, she started visiting the piano more often, but not every day like before. She wanted to give others the space to play, to share their own music. Sometimes she simply sat among the listeners, nodding and clapping for strangers. The man often joined her, and they would talk for hours about life, about music, about the simple beauty of ordinary days. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with soft orange light, she turned to him and said, "You know, I used to think music was my way of escaping the world, but I realized it's my way of being part of it." He looked at her, understanding perfectly. "And you made us all part of it, too." She smiled, her eyes glistening. "Then it was worth everything." From that day on, the piano became a symbol not just of her story, but of everyone's. Tourists came to see it, but the locals treated it with quiet respect. It wasn't about fame, it was about feeling something genuine. The mural behind the piano was touched up with new colors, brighter this time, and someone painted a small phrase at the bottom, "Music lives where hearts listen." Years passed, and the city changed as cities always do. New buildings rose, buses changed routes, people came and went, but the piano stayed. It was repaired and repainted many times, yet its soul remained the same. Every now and then, someone would sit and play a familiar tune, and passers-by would stop, feeling something they couldn't quite name. Those who knew the story would smile knowingly. The man, now older, still visited often. He would sit on the bench nearby, sipping his coffee, watching the world move around the music. Sometimes, when the crowd was small, he'd place his hand gently on the piano, remembering her laughter, her kindness, her gift. He didn't know where she was now, but in some way she never really left. On the anniversary of her first performance, the city organized a small event at the bus stop. People brought candles, flowers, and shared stories about what the piano meant to them. Some had met friends there. Some said it gave them courage to chase dreams, and others simply said it reminded them to slow down and listen. As the sun set that evening, a young girl approached the piano. She looked nervous, her small hands trembling as she touched the keys. But then she smiled and began to play the same gentle tune that started it all. Her music floated through the air, soft and full of hope. The crowd listened in silence, moved by the familiar sound. The man closed his eyes, and for a moment, he could almost see her again, sitting there with that calm expression, her fingers gliding over the keys, her heart in every note. The music wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever stopped to listen. When the song ended, the little girl looked up shyly. The crowd clapped warmly, and the man smiled through his tears. He whispered softly, "She'd be proud." The lights around the piano twinkled as evening deepened, and the sound of buses and laughter filled the air.